Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about the Orville Season 1, Episode 2. And so this is my review of the show. So I would give this 3 out of 5 stars. This content contains major spoilers for Season 1, Episode 2 of the Orville. All right, so first thing I want to talk about is what is the Orville, right? Well, with Episode 2, we really now know exactly what the Orville really is. Because when the trailers for this came up, it was very confusing. It looked like a parody of Star Trek, but it looked like the actual CGI, the computer-generated imagery that was in the show, was better than anything that had ever been in any Star Trek television show that had ever been on. In my opinion, it was really good. And actually, we saw that in Episode 1, that the special effects on Orville are equal or better than what was on any of the Star Trek television shows. Which I was really confused when I saw that in Episode 1, because I'm like, this is a waste. Why would you put all this time and effort into creating amazing spaceships and amazing sets and all this for a parody? Like, you know. And then the other thing that confused me was they were making fun of Star Trek tropes, and then at the same time, the action scenes would start, and people would start getting shot at with lasers, and then they would bring up, like, inspiring music or music that would make you want to root for the good guys, right? Root for the crew of the Orville. And I was like, wait, you can't have it both ways. You can't make fun of the show and then, you know, ask us to care about these characters. So I was like, what is this thing? It's really weird. Well, I watched Season 1, Episode 2 of the Orville, and I now know what the Orville is, and it's absolutely fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. So this is my opinion of what the Orville is. The Orville is a relaunch of Star Trek Next Generation, 95% accurate. It literally that much, right? And I think, well, in my opinion, that much. That, you know, because I watched all of that. I'm watching the Orville now. This is just a relaunch, right? So what really is happening here? Well, Seth MacFarlane is a very, very smart guy, and it's clear to me that he's a huge Star Trek fan, right? So I really feel it's not really a parody, it's an homage, and it's also Seth MacFarlane going, this is how I would do Star Trek, okay? Now, the reason the parody is mixed in incredibly minimally. The parody is mixed in minimally, right? It's about 5% of the show. And the reason it's there, and the reason it will be in every episode, and there'll be 3 to 7 jokes in every episode mocking the original Star Trek, or actually Star Trek TNG, is for legal purposes. The parody is there only for legal purposes. So here's what the Orville is. The Orville is a brand masquerade of Star Trek TNG with parody mixed in to make it legal to remake this so they're not sued. But then really, the moment you reach that legal threshold, the show is just a complete relaunch of TNG. Now, Seth MacFarlane, what he's done, I think he's 100%, very, very smart guy. He 100% accomplished what he's trying to do, and legally, he's okay. Okay. Now, here's the question: is he okay ethically? Is it ethically okay to brand masquerade another show? Here's my answer. In this circumstance, one, it's complicated because this doesn't happen a lot. It really doesn't. Especially brand masquerade at this level of money. Millions and millions of dollars are being invested in this show, right? Okay, so here's the answer. Yes, absolutely. Here's why. One, Star Trek's 50 years old, right? It's a part of the American zeitgeist. So I think, you know, it'd be like you saying, oh, you know, what was one of the first cop shows? Like Hawaii Five-0 was the first cop show. I'm sure there was one before that, Dragnet, whatever. Whatever the first cop show was, and saying, oh, nobody else can make a cop show. Well, what is Star Trek? Star Trek is an optimistic, starfaring sci-fi show. I mean, it did create that genre, but I think it'd be unfair to say nobody else can make that, right? But he is brand masquerading it. I mean, he's using the uniforms with minor alterations. He's using the spaceships with minor alterations. He's using the political structure with minor alterations. Just add minor alterations to everything I say from here forward. Economics, weapons, ship systems, races, all of it. Like it is a 95% relaunch of Star Trek Next Generation, which is brilliant. Actually, it's incredible. Like this show is not what I expected it to be. Another thing that really surprised me about this show is I watched Orville, the first episode, and I was just kind of shaking my head, I'm really not sure what this is, what is going on here. And it's really, really fascinating, just how different this show is. And so, now that the second episode is up, we know what the Orville is. It's a brand masquerade of TNG with the barest amount of parody put in order to make it legal. And when I think about that, and I think what he's done, I'm thinking, yeah, that's pretty darn cool, because TNG is an amazing show, right? And there's a lot of factors that make what Seth MacFarlane's doing absolutely brilliant. And I think he got incredibly lucky, because I think the Orville could do extremely well. Here's my prediction. I think the Orville will get at least 3 seasons. Which when I saw that trailer, I never thought I would be saying this, right? So here's the deal, all right? I think here's the reason why what Seth MacFarlane is doing is okay. It's 50 years old. And then also Star Trek has a major problem that a lot of people have not really talked about. Star Trek is a product of the 60s. It had 60s values. It is now 2017. We know that 60s values 100% failed. Almost every experiment they made in the 60s was a failure. Polyamorousness, generally. I understand that people go down it. Again, I'll add my opinion. In my opinion, every single thing that they tried in the 60s, pretty much all the major things that came out of that were a failure, with the following exceptions. The civil rights movement out of the 60s was 100% useful, absolutely benefited the country. Here's the things that did fail. Drug culture, absolutely 100% failure. We're still dealing with the fallout right now. Polyamorousness, failure. The vast majority of those people, who went into polyamorous relationships, we know how that ended. It didn't end with them 40 years later, still together, and everything was cool. It ended exactly the way you would think it would, in the thousands, right? So if you took 1,000 polyamorous relationships and there probably were easily 1,000 polyamorous relationships from the 60s, maybe 3 are intact today, we're intact even in the 90s or the 2000s. You don't have to go all the way up to today, right? You could still just say even when they were healthy and young, so polyamorousness, drug culture, all those things were massive. Those 2 things were massive failures. Civil rights movement, massive success from the 60s. Right, so that's just it. The Star Trek is an absolute child of the '60s, and those what's the word? Those ethics, right? Those experiments are not the basis for a show today. You can't do them because people already know the answers to them. Excuse me. All right, so what do you do with Star Trek now? It's a really good question. So the answer is what Seth MacFarlane is doing with it. You relaunch it and do TNG in 2017. That is a brilliant, brilliant idea. And what's even more brilliant is Seth MacFarlane. I have to say, I am not a fan of Family Guy. I really dislike that show incredibly. But I really feel that Seth MacFarlane is trying to do something new with his career. I have incredible respect for that. He's trying to go in a new direction. And the other thing is he's leveraging what he's already done, right? So I think it would have been very hard for almost anyone else to get this thing to fly but Seth MacFarlane had the juice in Hollywood, to get this thing to go. And that's impressive, I have to say. I'm really impressed with what Seth MacFarlane has accomplished here. It's surprising, it's brilliant, and it's fun. One thing that really surprised me was I went on to Hulu to watch Teen Titans, which I highly recommend. It's a fantastic show. And I saw, and as soon as I brought up Hulu, it said, here's the Orville, episode 2. Would you like to watch it? And when I hit that button, I was surprised how happy I was to hit that button and watch another episode of the Orville. I am really, really shocked how good the Orville is. It is very, very good show, and I definitely wish they would kind of tame down the humor. It's a little adult in my opinion, but it's Seth MacFarlane. You know what I mean? And for Seth MacFarlane, he's incredibly well behaved for him, which is really interesting. So the Orville is really, really fascinating. Now I want to talk a little bit about the content within episode 2. So episode 2 was about Alara, who was the security officer, and there is a few things happen on the bridge. So this whole thing's got to get orchestrated for this to happen. So what happens is the captain, so Ed and Kelly, the captain and the first officer, are removed from the ship by a circumstance. And then, additionally to that, Bortis, the second officer, is removed from command temporarily for a 21-day period because he is hatching an egg, which is his child, right? Very interesting. So at that point, Alara, the security officer, is made to be the captain of the ship. Now, I didn't know this until I could have captured the clues in episode 1, but there was so much happening in episode 1 that I really didn't get it. But Alara is the millennial, so they're going to tell millennial stories with Alara, which I think is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant, really, really fascinating. This is a very fascinating show. So it's like, what happens if you put a millennial in charge? Now, listen to Simon Sinek. He will tell you that the industry, by and large, has leveled the following accusations against the millennial generation in the workplace: that they are unfocused, that they're self-interested, that they're lazy, that and that basically that's it, and that they're hard to manage, right? So this show is what happens when you put a millennial in charge, right? Which is a brilliant setup, really, really interesting setup. And so they answer that with that one. It was really fascinating to me, because essentially what the show said was there was a couple people in the show who talked to Laura directly and were saying, you have to do this. You cannot fail, right? And the reason why was they were like, your Venn diagrams are no longer allowed to fail, right? And it was really, really fascinating. Very, very fascinating. And so like these two older other crew members come alongside her and then assist her in order to get her ready to actually do her thing. Now, I will say, I really like this show. I think Seth MacFarlane is a brilliant guy. He is definitely Hollywood. He is pure Hollywood, right? And so the show has some really bad messages in it, which I want to recognize and say, I 100% disagree with this, and I'm hoping they remove this from the show. So here's what it is, right? One of the things they say is essentially, at 2 points in the show, they're like, if you have to deal with something difficult, what you should do is become intoxicated, either through legal or illegal drugs. And and so I was like, that's really not a good message. Not a good message for anyone, right? So I'm hoping they take that out of the show. I think Seth MacFarlane thinks it's funny, but I hope that that gets stripped out of the show a little bit. Bad message. The other thing that was in this show was they took the time to do a classic Star Trek bit where they're like, hey, here's a social injustice, right? Star Trek was, Gene Roddenberry was SJW before SJW even existed, right? So, social justice warrior, right? So defining my terms here. So basically, By the way, I'm using both SJW and social justice warrior. I have an old theory that people who like the term social justice warrior say social justice warrior, and people who are opposed to social justice warriors say SJWs. SJWs. So that's how you can tell the difference quickly. I'm a bit of a mix. I think I am a social justice warrior in some ways, and then I think I have opinions that would be repugnant to many social justice warriors in other ways. So let's talk about what they were talking about in the show. So one of the things they talked about in the show was they said, 200-300 years ago, people had zoos, and that was ridiculous, and you shouldn't take a lesser intelligent species and make them your slave, or, imprison them, right? Now, here's my take on zoos, right? I get where they're coming from. They're trying to say, that we should treat animals better. Now, here's the issue. I'm a carnivore. I eat animals, right? And that's never going to change. I also believe strongly that human beings were made to eat animals. And the reason why I believe that is the Olympics, right? The Olympics are... and I will change my opinion on this the moment the Olympics change. The Olympics are the greatest exhibition of human competition on Earth. Also, professional sports. Same thing for professional sports. Same thing I'm about to say for Olympics occurs for professional sports. So here's what it is. What happens when you take a vegetarian or a vegan and you put them in the Olympics or a professional sport? They're going to get stomped. They're going to get so stomped, it will be ridiculous. So that says that the human body, to me, the human body needs protein from the form of animals in order to go forward, right? So if I'm eating animals, you can bet I'm in support of having zoos. Now, I think also, not just my reasons for having zoos, but zoos often have the most environmentalist, environmental positive, role models in them, and the people who are in them care deeply about animals, and they're often treated incredibly well. And then the other thing is millions of kids throughout the United States of America who would never get to see these animals get to see these animals, and I think that's important. So Seth MacFarlane in the show took the time to say zoos are bad, right? I 100% disagree with him, right? But I love this episode, and the reason why is that's what Star Trek did. It opened the conversation. It always opened the conversation. So this show is absolutely brilliant. I'm a big fan of it now, and I just want to say one final time, here's what it is. So the Orville is a brand masquerade of Star Trek: The Next Generation, a complete relaunch of Star Trek Next Generation, up to 5%. 5% of his parody, and that is put in for legal purposes only, and I think ethically it's fine to do this. I have to say, thumbs up to Seth MacFarlane, man. I like the direction he's heading. Take care.